Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Ad Club's Ask the Experts virtual series brought to you by the Young Professionals Committee. Thanks for tuning in. This is Michael Knopf here. I'm a vice president at MediaLink, and today we're here with Afdhel Aziz, who's the founder of Conspiracy of Love, a brand consultancy, and also a contributor on Forbes, as well as the author of a great book called Good is the New Cool. Let's get started. Afdhel, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael.
So I think, one of the things we wanted to talk about was, right now we're at this kind of watershed moment in the industry, and you've been beating the drum of, purpose-driven marketing for a long time. I would say you're almost like the godfather of this space. And, what are you seeing right now out there? Is this a watershed moment in the industry? Is your phone ringing off the hook? What's going on right now in your world?
Yeah, well, thank you. I think it's important just kind of take a step back and define what we mean, right? But when we talk about purpose, and for those of you who don't know my background, I spent 20 years as a professional marketer. So I was on the client side, first at Procter & Gamble, on Max Factor, Vidal Sassoon, then at Nokia, back when there was a Nokia. Then I moved to New York in 2007, and I worked at Heineken and at Absolut Vodka, two amazing brands. And right throughout, I was a kind of what you'd call like a general all-purpose client who was doing everything from above the line, below the line, media, digital, PR, experiential, the whole kit and caboodle. And I love marketing, I love advertising, I love the creative and media industries. And I think one of the things that we saw when we were doing the book back in 2016, myself and my co-author Bobby Jones, was the rise of a different set of values where brands were being judged not just on the amount of cool that they were putting out into the world, but also the amount of good. Hence the title of the book, Good is the New Cool. Our thesis was that brands needed to think about doing good in the same way they had historically thought about being cool. Mm-hmm. Cool still matters, product and price still matter, but increasingly there is a new set of attributes and values where consumers are judging the products and services that they buy based on how ethical, sustainable, how good for people and the planet they are. And especially with the rise of social media, it's easier than ever before for those brands to be pulled down, to be, cut down, if there is a difference between what they say and what they do as well. So that was the kind of starting thesis of what we had back in 2016. And then what happened was, with time, that has now really exploded, right? So you saw the rise of, brands like Nike with the Colin Kaepernick ad. You saw the approach that amazing brands like Patagonia have taken, going above and beyond their kind of environmental sustainability and suing the president. And so we were in an era of kind of unprecedented brand activism, if you will. And what was fascinating was seeing how some of the most iconic brands on the planet were really kind of starting to take a new stance on social issues, Levi's on gun control, and then sometimes also backing up their words with the proof of what they meant. So Dick's Sporting Goods deciding to stop selling weapons, CVS, the tobacco, the drugstore stopping selling tobacco products, sacrificing their profits because they felt it wasn't in line with their values. So besides the way it was being manifested in advertising, there was a whole lot going on in companies around this idea of what we would call purpose. And we use purpose as kind of a catch-all term to describe everything ranging from CSR, cause marketing, sustainability, to the idea that, you can actually profitably fix problems in the world as well. Adidas is another great example of a client that we worked with at Conspiracy of Love, an amazing success story with the Adidas ocean plastic sneakers, where they were pulling tons and tons of plastic out of the ocean, turning them into sneakers, selling them at an amazing profit, generating, billions of dollars of revenue, which went back into solving the problem again. So there were amazing examples of businesses now finding new ways to put doing good at the core of their business model, in their growth model, as opposed to something that was ancillary, that was secondary, window dressing, exactly. So that was where we were going before COVID-19 happened, right? Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's the subject of the book number 2 that Bobby and I are writing. It's called The Principles of Purpose. It's available for pre-order now. We can share a link with your audience here so they can pick it up. If Good is the New Cool, Market Like You Give a Damn was about creating a purpose-driven brand, the principles of purpose are how to create a purpose-driven company or organization as well. It's really like a handbook for CEOs. So all of that was tracking really, really well and was promising. Then COVID-19 happened. And what's happened is really unprecedented because it's accelerated this topic dramatically. It's gone from theoretical and abstract to here and now, right? When you look at all the data, you know, we do a weekly webinar where we've had folks from Ipsos and Edelman and Kantar. All of the data shows that now more than ever, consumers are looking to brands to save us. Alongside government, they're saying we need corporations to step up. Otherwise, we're not sure we're going to make it through this whole pandemic. They're watching companies to see which companies are firing their employees, which companies are really kind of walking the walk as opposed to just talking the talk. And so we're now in a new context where this idea that business should be a force for good has shifted from niche to mainstream. It is just the expectation. And what's happening is that has revealed a gulf in the ability for companies to show up in the way that their consumers want them to do it, right? So we kind of looked at this stuff in waves. So wave one of corporations reacting to COVID-19, you had them writing checks. Amazing, $100 billion here, Unilever, Netflix, $100 million, great. Keep writing those checks. I wrote a piece in Forbes called, "Here's how CSR needs to act as first responders." Then you saw the repurposing of supply chains. Fantastic. Let's make ventilators, let's make face masks, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
In that time, then also we started to see advertising from brands that started to talk about this. I think everybody was reading the same insights reports, which said come across as reassuring, come across as, vaguely optimistic. And I'm
music
sure
and the white background and the "we're here for you" and all this.
You've seen the COVID supercuts that are floating around where every single ad looked exactly the same, right? And I have compassion for those creatives who are behind those, because it's a tough needle to thread, right? I think brands either stopped talking and said, we don't know what to say, so we're going to pull all of our media spend. That is happening across the board. Or if we are going to get out there, we can't go out there with our usual, buy one, get one free, 30% discount advertising. We need to show that we are warm and empathic and caring. Great. But the problem is people are bored of those ads. And at the point where they're kind of run their course, now we're facing like a deafening silence from the creative and media industries who don't know how to construct the kinds of initiatives that people are asking for right now. If you look at all the data, what people are saying is, I want brands to come and help my community. I want them to help the people who I know. I want them to help my family if we're all isolated and at home. And what's missing are what we at Conspiracy of Love, we call them acts of moral imagination, right? So I think what advertising agencies are really good at doing is coming up with acts of creative imagination. I'm going to tell the story of your brand or product or service in a way that's beautiful, emotional. It shows off the product attributes. It shows off an emotional resonance. Great. But what is needed right now is acts of moral imagination, where you are able to sit down with your brand and go, okay, here is the problem that your consumers are telling you that they have. Here's how you as a brand can then construct something in order to help them, and in some cases, help them help others as well. So I'll give you a perfect example of a brand who I've discovered recently who I think did a terrific job of this, right? I wrote about this in Forbes. They're a fashion brand called Tieks, T-I-E-K-S. They make ballet flats, foldable ballet flats. I did not know about this product before, but I've become a huge fan since. And we had Kafir Gabrielli, who's the CEO of Tieks, on our weekly webinar last Friday. You can look up the clip, it's on YouTube. And he told us this amazing story of how, first of all, Tieks is an amazing brand that they do a lot with microloans and financing. So they're the #1 donor on kiva.org, which gives microloans to female entrepreneurs around the world. So they were already doing a lot of good before this. But then COVID-19 happened. They got asked to donate PPE, and they did that with hospitals in the Los Angeles area. But then they saw this need for face masks. And at first they bought some sewing machines and they started sewing it themselves. But then they went out to their community and said, hey, if you sew face masks, we're going to give you gift cards for, I think it's like 25 face masks, $50 gift cards, 50 face masks, $100, whatever the number is. And then something magical happened where the Teaks community spread out all across the United States, started sewing face masks. And at last count, I think after 4 weeks, they had sewn maybe over 600,000.
Wow.
Right. So Teaks mobilized an army of women out there to pull out their own sewing machines and start doing good in their own communities, to start liaising with their local hospitals. They did it, by the way, anecdotally, way beyond the gift cards. The amount of gift cards versus what was being produced was not really in proportion, which shows you they weren't doing it for the gift cards. They were doing it because Teaks as a brand gave them a platform, empowered them to do some good in their own communities.
Yeah.
And I love this example because there's a couple of really important points here for brands to think about. Number one, Teaks didn't say, buy my product and I will do some good. They didn't make doing good conditional whether that person bought it. Instead, they flipped it. They said, if you do some good, we'll give you a gift card. Teaks is having unprecedented trial because of this, because there are all these people who did not hear about Teaks, but whose friend told them, hey, I'm doing this face mask thing. Do you want to get involved? Suddenly the brand is on their radar. Suddenly you have a huge influx of new customers coming in, which they didn't have before.
And that's brilliant word of mouth, marketing and growth right there.
They're brilliant word of mouth. By the way, they didn't plan any of this. This is almost like things they learned as they went by, right?
Yeah.
So think about it. It's driving trial. It's driving advocacy. You can be damn sure it's driving loyalty, because guess what? Those women are going to keep buying in the future this brand, right?
Yeah.
And so it's an excellent example of what we think is a great idea, active moral imagination. In the book, we talk about how brands need to be the helper, not the hero. This is a cardinal error that brands make all the time. They make themselves the hero of the story. This is not a moment or a time where you should be making yourselves of the story. Yeah. And Teaks did a fantastic job of just going, you guys are the heroes. The people on the front lines are heroes. Let's help them. And we are just a vehicle, a platform to do it as well. That's
such a great story. And I think probably so many of the people that, our audience are people that are in creative roles and in advertising. And, for a company like Teaks, probably a pretty small company, flat structure, easy to get ideas pushed through. If you're a creative, let's say working on a huge, multinational brand, what steps can you take to make these types of things happen? And how does it, what do you recommend to, our listeners that are kind of in advertising or creative industries? How can they make these types of initiatives happen? How do you get that drumbeat going internally?
Yeah. Well, we have a process, at Conspiracy of Love that we take our brand clients to. We are fortunate to work with brands like Oreo Cookie and Adidas and Red Bull and Microsoft. And we have a process which usually we do in like a 6-week sprint, but you could probably fast track it right now, given the situation we're in. So it starts with knowing the purpose of your brand, right? It's really essential that you start from having a clear understanding of what your brand is about, and kind of starting with the authenticity of what you're there to do. Secondly, we talk about thinking about people as citizens, not consumers. So you as brands then start to look at your consumer base, but don't look at them in terms of that narrow transaction of here's what I want you to buy. Think about them as citizens who have a wide range of issues and causes that they care about. Teaks identified with their consumers on this level about face masks and wanting to help hospitals and frontline workers, right? And the next is don't advertise, solve problems, right? So this is the core of this. It's perfectly fine to solve the problem and then make an ad about it or create digital content or PR or social media to amplify it, but start with the problem you are solving and how you're helping engage your consumers to participate. And so I would start with that as a diagnostic to say, okay, I'll give you another example that I literally saw 2 hours ago. I haven't had time to dive into this as yet to see whether it was successful or not. But Oscar Mayer, the hot dog company, did a front yard cookout. It was on May 2nd. It was about a week ago. I completely missed it until I saw something about it. And I just said, hey, listen, on May 2nd, everybody wheel your barbecues out to the front of your gardens and just do what you were doing in the backyard, but do it in the front yard. And, you know, say hi to your neighbors. Just show them, you know, that you're still there. Life goes on, you know. It's socially isolated. It's completely safe. But I thought that was brilliant. Like for a hot dog manufacturer to say, just go out there and barbecue, to do what you're doing. It's the simplest act that you can think of. And I think
Afdhel, I'm gonna pause the recording for a second because you've broken up. Hey, Afdhel.
Hi, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I think we broke up for a second.
Okay, cool. Good. Yeah, it froze up for a second.
Cool. So I think I think to the point of the Oscar Mayer, I think it's about creating a movement, inspiring some action in your user, and thinking about them as a citizen and kind of their whole life as opposed to just that narrow transactional view. I think that's a really great point. Anyone else that you've seen? You know, these are a couple of great examples. Like any other kind of best practices or tips that you're seeing out there? Anything else that's inspired you recently?
Yeah, I think, you know, in this moment, I think it's almost like we're going back down through like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So if you work in marketing or planning, whatever, you kind of know the triangle of where, you know, people's needs are, right? And it's important to note that it's a tale of two countries out there at the moment, right? There's a tale of those people who are privileged enough to be working from home. They've got a job, there's a paycheck coming in, they have health insurance, and yes, they might be bored, frustrated. I'm sure they have like anxiety and depression going on, but they have the luxury of resilience. They have the privilege of resilience. And at the other end of the spectrum, there is another whole scenario where the 30 million people plus who are unemployed, the people who were living paycheck to paycheck, the 37 million food insecure people. We do some pro bono work with Feeding America. Usually there's 37 million food insecure people in America. That's jumped to like 60 million. And that's going to be there for the next 18 months.
Yeah.
There is another. Life just became extremely difficult, extremely hard as well. So when you're a brand, what we'd encourage you to do is think about those two realities that are out there, you know, and be really clear about who you're talking to, you know, and what your consumers are doing. But I think there's also the opportunity, and I go back to the Teaks example, to help one community help the other. How do you take that community of people who have the privilege and luxury of resilience, whose main problem might be boredom, and how do you give them something to do that helps generate positive resources for the other half of this country, like these guys sewing face masks for frontline workers. I think there is a really powerful engine you can create where if you're a brand, you can really be clever about who you're helping and show up in an authentic way, but help both sections of the community at the moment, because it's deep and it's not going away for a while.
It sounds like it's really easy to, you know, have a big fail as well in this moment if you take the wrong tone. So, you know, and you have to speak to those two groups. So if you have any predictions, you know, kind of for the fall or for the next couple months here, where do you think the tone is going to shift? You know, do you think we're going to see, you know, the messaging kind of change? Do you think we're going to move back towards more traditional promotional advertising? Or if you were a betting man, where would you kind of see things going over the next few months?
Well, I think the Pepsi Kendall Jenner of this moment has been the Frito-Lay ad, which came out, where I just looked at them and went, what was that brief and what were people thinking? Creating a sanctimonious finger-wagging ad at other brands for advertising, you know, egotistically trumpeting your own actions as a brand, but doing it in the form of an ad. Like the irony and the lack of self-awareness, it astounds me, and I don't know how that team arrived at that moment, but to me that is a shining example of what not to do on so many different levels. So please don't do any of that stuff. I think, look, we talk at Conspiracy about how what brands should do is create things at the intersection of useful and delightful, right? If you can create experiences, whether that's digital experiences, content, it's difficult to do physical experiences now. But if you really then go back to that framework of thinking about people as citizens, not consumers, thinking about problems you can solve in their lives, and then applying that creativity to coming up with a way to fill that void. That is what I want to see the creative firepower of the advertising industry trained on. I don't want to see trained on 4-second YouTube pre-rolls. I don't want to see trained on yet another anthemic spot that's very, lofty, but doesn't actually communicate anything. I've said this before. I feel like if creatives can treat the world as their canvas, not just a screen, and start to think about using that moral imagination and fixing problems in people's lives, it's going to be a lot more fun than churning out yet another, spot that no one's ever going to see because of ad blocking or ad-free streaming or any of those things. But B, it'll give you a sense of meaningfulness that you're actually doing something that is positive right now. I'll tell you some clues as to where people want help. We had some amazing research from the Zeno group who came on. You can look it up on the conspiracyoflove.co website and Zeno group. They looked at values, and what they noticed was that consumer values were shifting back to a set that was most like the Great Depression.
Wow.
And so what consumers are valuing now is things like thrift and simplicity and family and community. Wow. These are all great clues as to places brands can go and find ways to engage their consumers and create those experiences which are useful and delightful to help people in the present moment as well.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap. And, thanks so much for your time, Afdhel. Super inspiring and a lot to think about, as always.
Thank you very much for having me, Michael. And hi to everybody out there. Stay safe.
All right. Thanks. We'll talk soon.
Bye-bye.